Elizabeth Lev is up next, but first, President Donald Trump and First Lady Melania lit the national Christmas tree on Wednesday. It's the 96th straight year for this presidential tradition. President Trump and the audience did a countdown, and Mrs. Trump hit the switch. The president also recited the Nativity story, wishing all a Merry Christmas, and then he gave a shout out to one of the performance groups that this audience knows so well. Watch. That was the Dominican Sisters of Mary, Mother of the Eucharist. Their album, Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring Christmas with the Dominican Sisters of Mary is available with the EWTN Religious Catalog, online, and at music stores everywhere. Nice touch to that tree lighting. My next guest is a noted art historian teaching Baroque, Christian, and Renaissance art at Duquesne University in Rome. She's also the author of the new book, How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, The Triumph of Beauty and Truth in Counter-Reformation Art. I'm thrilled to have with us here in studio to talk about it, Dr. Elizabeth Lev. Great to see you, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me.
So nice to see you here. I'm used to seeing you in museums and catacombs. So
I'm completely out of context.
That's okay.
I'm like a painting off this wall.
But the lighting is working well. Tell me, why do you make the argument that Catholic art saved the faith? Did it need to be saved?
I think any student of the early 16th century, when we have the famous event of Martin Luther's opening of the Reformation in 1517, would say that the church and the faithful found themselves in a state of complete chaos. So you have different religions that are all presented to you between Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, and others. And what the real problem is the printing press. Think about the increase in information. So you have millions of pamphlets that are just inundating the faithful or just the society. And these pamphlets, to get people's attention, they need a very kind of catchy type of title in writing, right? So what we would call today something like clickbait.
A hook.
A hook. And so they're very polemical. So you have a situation of different religions, tons of information about all these different religions, and the faithful who, for the very first time, have to make choices. If it's been one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church forever, then today, or all of a sudden, it becomes this sea of choices. So while the tone in print is very harsh and very polemical and very antagonistic, art becomes a great way to take the focus off the conflict with each other and to start looking together at one thing. So it becomes not only didactic, but it's a great almost peacekeeper.
It unites people. What lessons do we have to learn today, and can the church learn from 500-year-old pieces of art that happened during the Counter-Reformation? Are there lessons applicable to us here? The
lessons of the 16th, 17th century art are, for the church, they're constants. Because the church is the works of art that the church commissioned in this period deal with sacraments. The teaching on the sacraments are the same. And so the representing of that teaching through art can certainly be helpful and useful today. The idea of intercession, the presence of these patron saints, guardian angels, the existence of purgatory, all this visually reinforced in the faithful. And then also the idea of how do we live out our faith in our contemporary life. It was a challenge in the 16th century, and it's a challenge in the 21st century.
Would you, I mean, as I look out at American culture today, we are a non-literate age. We are really back in some ways to the stained glass and the great images and paintings that swallowed up our forefathers. We're back there in some ways. The problem is the church producing artistic items and artistic works to draw the attention of that non-literate consumer, that non-literate former faithful?
That contemporary art issue is a very complicated one. There is a great deal of hope for contemporary art. There are a lot of great artists that are out there producing really beautiful works. Where there's a lot of willingness for artists to come to the fore, I often think the problem is patronage and public. And so while the public is illiterate today, if you will, in biblical questions, the public was not necessarily more literate in that period. So to explain this a little bit better. Maybe the biblical stories were
Right.
a lot more.
They knew the basic
biblical stories, and they knew
Mm-hmm.
the stories of the saints because they lived out the calendar in a way
Right.
that obviously most people don't today. But really, when it came down to these essential questions of sacraments, I mean, that's part of what made the Reformation so powerful. No, this is not the body of Christ. Well, who's going to explain this to the faithful, and how can the faithful defend it and own that concept of the real presence? And so we have, I think, a need to create a more demanding public, a more sensitive public, and simply for more patronage. And not just, bishops have to commission more churches.
Yeah.
No, lay people need to put religious art in the home, I think. It's part of our lives.
Yeah, and the church has also lost its taste, I hate to say, in so many ways, not only in the liturgical setting, but beyond it. Let's talk about some of the things that really work. And this book, I have to say, this book is one of the most splendid depictions because as you are introducing us to things, it really is like visiting the Lislev Museum because it's curated side by side. These pieces are put up against each other in a context. And I love that you also broaden this. It's not just painting, it's sculpture, it's architecture. And it broadens, I think, the understanding of the time and the impetus that drove these artists in that, to face the challenge they were confronting at the time. And it teaches us a lot. Let's talk about the Church of the Gesù in Rome and how this was constructed with a particular aim in mind. You've already referenced it. Tell us what they achieved there and what was the purpose.
Well, the Church of the Gesù is the very first church to be built in Rome after the Reformation, after the sack of Rome, after Rome is really, if you will, almost fallen to its knees. So we have the Jesuit order that comes into play in the 1530s. The lay people, the church, are all very excited about this group of young priests who are willing to go out and preach the faith and the truth and truth of the faith. They want to help them, and they start to fund a church. And so Cardinal Alexander Farnese, who is the wealthiest cardinal in the College of the Cardinals, will pay for the church. And what makes this construction interesting is that the Jesuits and Cardinal Farnese were not always getting along.
Page.
The Jesuits are about, oh no, we want austerity, we want simplicity. And Cardinal Farnese is like, no, make it bigger, put more gold gilding in. But the beauty of it is, they work together to create a church that when you walk into the Gesù, you open up the door, which is relatively low compared to the ceiling, and you catch your breath. And one of the main things about the church is a barrel vault ceiling. So it's got a very high ceiling, and it makes something like a telescope. So your eye focuses straight down the nave. And then it was the first church to be built without a rood screen. And I know you know this, but just in case anybody doesn't, I don't mean R-U-D-E,
Right.
it's R-O-O-D. It's
Right.
a screen that used to be put into churches to separate lay people from the sanctuary. So they remove it. And so you walk in, the tabernacle's on the altar, there it is, the path to Jesus. And so this incredible construction, this in a certain sense battle between this religious order and this very worldly cardinal, which has such a happy ending. Because at the end of the day, Cardinal Farnese ended up with a personal conversion. He's buried in the Gesù. So I like to say he built their church for them, but they saved his soul.
They saved his soul, yeah, and it is, and today you can still see it, it's spectacular. But I love how the art and the architecture all serves the heart of why this is here and what it existed to do. And there's another story you tell so beautifully in the book, St. Charles Borromeo, which this is something I did not know. So there are a lot of hidden gems here, things we just take for granted. St. Charles Borromeo was the first, I guess, to construct confessionals in Milan. And then tell us about how this catches on and some of the beautiful examples you point out in the book.
Charles Borromeo, that multifaceted saint, archbishop, treatise on architecture, and what he's really trying to do is to apply the Council of Trent, so this 20-year council that the church has to address the problems brought out in during the Reformation.
And again, confession is under attack as a sacrament.
Confession is massively under attack. And so confession and the Eucharist are the two that are the most attacked. And so he starts thinking about how to create a confessional that, first of all, is a purpose-built space. It's not we're going to go into a back room, which helps to avoid scandals with the
Yes.
clergy, which are very present in this period.
Right.
So he's thinking, how do I create a situation where we don't have scandalous situations, and then something that's inviting. So here you are, there's the church, there's the confessional. Why don't I go to confession? And so he designs the confessional, which we see in Rome. I don't see them so much in the United States, but they're open on either side. So you kneel on either side, the priest goes, the confessor
In the
goes
middle.
in the middle, and the screen's on.
And he's closed off on both sides.
Exactly. So it's, I mean, it's amazing all the things that came out of that period, addressing very specific practical problems in a beautiful way.
One of the things you talk about in the book, and you break it up into three sections: the sacraments, the intercession, and then the work of humans in salvation history. You talk about the saints, St. Mary Magdalene particularly. Why does she become such a focal point in this period? We see her in so much art. You mentioned Reni's work, Guido Reni, and others. Why did she become so important?
So I've been irritated about the portrayal of Mary Magdalene ever since the Da Vinci Code thing. So I've been sort of biding my time with this book to be able to say, no, that's not who she is.
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene is a figure who's always been in art. She's omnipresent in art. She's recognized. She has more costume changes than your average pop star. She's, one day she's the wealthy woman with the alabaster jar. She takes on a very, very fundamental role. She is the poster child for confession. She really is the image of penitence. So she goes from being, swathed in these beautiful robes holding her jar to the most dramatic person underneath in the crucifixion. Later on, she becomes the one who's weeping the most. She expresses our uncontrolled grief in a situation like that. In the Counter-Reformation era, she becomes the penitent, the woman who was beautiful, but the woman who eventually realizes all the things in this world don't matter as much as Christ. And so she makes penance look good.
Tell me for a moment about Caravaggio, one of my favorites, and to walk into those churches and to see Caravaggio's just hanging out on the wall near the entryway of churches, uncovered, unguarded. You put a quarter in and the lights come on like a stadium, which you as an art...
It's gone up now. It's more like $2 in.
Okay, $2. But still, to have that kind of light on these irreplaceable images, I still scratch my head. The conservationist in me says, can we put this behind glass and in a museum? Tell me about the entombment, that particular work, and what Caravaggio's contribution is. He's only on the scene for what, a decade?
His career, basically, he bursts on the scene. He has a little bit of work before 1600, but he burst on the scene in 1599, which is on the eve of the Jubilee year of 1600. And it's going to be the biggest Jubilee since 1500 because the Reformation has caused problems in the middle. So the church is preparing for an estimated 3 million pilgrims. Now, this is 1600. There are no buses, no trains, no airplanes. There are going to be 3 million pilgrims. They're going to be coming through the northern gate, which is the Piazza del Popolo, and they're going to be walking around the city and looking at different parts of the city. And so they bring all these artists in. And even this Caravaggio, this kind of, he doesn't paint like Raphael. He doesn't, as a matter of fact, he never would have been successful if the Renaissance standards had continued. Caravaggio's art doesn't conform to what the other, the perspective and the other rules of painting. But when he makes these gritty images with this very powerful light, he's irresistible. So who notices him right after the Pope? The Oratorians. This amazing congregation founded by Philip Neri, who understand that faith is also delightful. So they give us music and oratory, and they want to give us paintings. And they commission this problematic in and out of jail artist.
He's not exactly not exactly the cleanest record, but we'll get into that another time.
They commissioned him to do an altarpiece for their church, where Philip Neri is buried, the Chiesa Nuova. And it's going to go on the right wall above an altar, and it's to show the entombment of Jesus. It's composed like no other painting before it. Usually entombments, no matter what you do in Renaissance painting, the way the viewer looks at things is he looks straight and then he looks up. This is kind of the gesture of viewing. In the case of Caravaggio's entombment, The way the movement works is his incredibly dramatic light comes up and hits a female figure in the upper right-hand corner. And from that little dot of light, your eye starts to go down. So the first thing he's making you do, think about it physically, you're bowing as you look at the painting. Then he puts this big, heavy, greenish, unwieldy body of Jesus that's just barely held up by his supporters. And then underneath it, he has a little piece of stone that seems to project into your space. So literally it's jutting in.
Coming to you.
And then underneath there's the altar with a blank space in the middle. And at that time, there were rules about painting. There actually were rules. And one was no blank spaces in painting. And yet Caravaggio not only leaves the blank space, but he has the hand of Jesus point to it. Like, hey, look, I left a blank space in the painting. That space, its function is filled when the priest celebrated Mass at the altar. When the priest stepped into that space, then that link between the body of Christ and the host was filled through the person of the priest in persona Christi. So you have this beautiful way of reinforcing in the mind of the faithful, this is the body of Christ. That's what art can do. You can explain transubstantiation till the cows come home, but when they see that,
it's an instant experience. It's a sensate experience, which Caravaggio kind of, the grittiness, the realism of it always kind of grabs you by the throat and pulls you in and you can't stop looking. The first time I saw it, I thought, this is like stagecraft. This is a scene. I mean, it's like a set. I hate to diminish it that way, but it practically is. It's a set for the Mass. It's a particular, a fantastic tableau, but what a scene. It's arresting when you see it in person.
Ironically, he was always accused of being too realistic, but you're absolutely right. You are right. He may have the gritty, dirty feet here. He may have something that looks a little realistic there, but the rest of it is completely staged.
Yeah, and beautiful. Tell me about I want to fast forward this to our own age. What can people get from this book? Why did you decide now was the time to write this? And then I have one last question. The idea of this book came to me in the lead up to 2017, which was the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And I kept noticing that the way people talk to each other about sacraments, the way we talk to each other about the faith, revealed a lot of confusion. So there's not like, this is in the Catholic Church. So this is how we follow teaching, this is how we follow teaching. There was a lot of chaos and confusion and tones that were starting to get really very polemical and uncharitable. And I was thinking to myself, when this first happened, there was a solution that the church came up with, which was to create works of art that would reinforce the faithful in what they had been taught. But mostly, if you think about it, when we look at a work, I take people on tours all the time, groups that don't know each other. And I think one of the most beautiful things is they may be different sides of the political spectrum, different sides of religious questions. But when we're looking at a work of art, we're all looking in the same direction. And so we're standing suddenly side by side before something we commonly agree on, which is beautiful. And so it was a way of kind of addressing these modern problems and saying that, once we could find solutions to talk to each other that didn't involve name calling and I'm never speaking to you again. No, it's unifying. Humanity is unifying. And I think true art pulls the best out of us. It reminds us of our humanity and the divinity that surrounds us if we're open to it. Now, here's the challenge. As I read the book and I finished the book, I was elated by it. I was always also a little depressed by it and here's why I was depressed. Not because of anything in the book, but because of what I see in the world. You go out and you look at contemporary art. I will put some images up for your reflection. This is the contemporary church art. It's less than edifying. It's rarely beautiful, Liz, and it doesn't draw you in or pull you in. In fact, it repels in many ways. What lessons can we take from what you've unearthed and captured here? And might the lively arts, music, film, video, might that be part of whatever the next expression the church struggles to find or comes upon?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. First of all, there's plenty of bad Catholic art, painting, sculpture, architecture. There's some dreadful architecture out there. It is true. There are a few little pockets of very beautiful artists who are doing very beautiful things. But you'll notice those pockets also, it's not just the artist. You require a very enlightened patron. You need someone who says, I'm building this church, and I would like to have this architect, and I would like to have that artist, and they're really thinking about things. So there are things that are created that are beautiful. So that's the one hand of it. On the other hand, the production of all the bad art that I'm sure you'll find plenty of, it's created a rift between the public and art. The public doesn't really trust Catholic art anymore. Like, what are you going to? It feels like you're walking into a dentist's office.
Yeah.
What are you going to do to me today?
Felt banner and sprinkles of color with no purpose.
It's to the point where they roll their eyes into the back of their head, and like you don't even want to argue about it anymore. But you're right. There are plenty of other arts that still have an excellent chance of reaching the faithful. I think the faithful kind of shut down on painting and sculpture for the moment, but the fact is, there is, between music and literature and cinema, there are loads and loads and loads of possibility where you have a public that's willing to be informed, to be enlightened, to be inspired by these art forms. And then the fine arts, as we call them, will have to catch up.
Yeah, no, well, you see it, and you see it in pockets. I mean, the most vivid example would be Gibson's Passion of the Christ, which, as you know, took so many of the images from Caravaggio. He borrowed wholesale some of those moments, which I'm sure as you watched, you saw all the paintings flickering before your eyes. But and I can remember him poring over the sketches and the paintings, and he was trying to honor as well as advance his own image. But it seems we're going to have to take this legacy and run with it in some way. And for too long, Catholic art and art in general have ignored this. Maybe it's time for a comeback. We shall see.
I'm hoping for a revival.
Well, you're certainly a big part of it. Liz Lev, thank you for being
you.
here. How Catholic art saved the faith, the triumph of beauty, and the truth in Counter-Reformation art by Elizabeth Lev is available now in bookstores everywhere and online.